Picture this. It's 2:14 a.m. on a bitterly cold Friday in November. The city is Hamburg, Germany. The year is 1992. A thick, icy fog, rolling in from the Elbe River, has swallowed the city whole. It clings to the tall, red brick warehouses of the Speicherstadt, the old port district, like a shroud. The fog muffles every sound, turning the world into a silent, grey tomb. The canals are black mirrors, still and undisturbed. The air is so cold it feels like breathing in powdered glass. Inside the fortress-like Hamburg Stadtbank, the silence is even deeper. This is not a modern bank of glass and steel. It's a 19th-century cathedral of commerce, a place of old money, with heavy oak doors, cold marble floors, and ceilings so high they are lost in shadow. The air inside is still, heavy with the smell of floor wax, old paper, ammonia, and the faint metallic tang of money. And in this silence, a man is moving. He's not a thief. He is not picking a lock. He is not disabling an alarm. He is in fact on the payroll. His name is Klaus Richter. He is 48 years old, and he is wearing the simple gray overalls of the bank's chief maintenance engineer. In his hand, he holds not a gun, but a small worn leather notebook and a digital thermometer, which he presses against a cold gray utility conduit. He makes a note in his ledger. Sub-basement quadrant 4. Temperature nominal. To the single sleeping guard in the lobby 3 floors above, Klaus is just a blip on a monitor, a man doing his job. A ghost in the machine. But in exactly 8 days, during the long, quiet holiday weekend, Klaus Richter will walk back into this sub-basement. He will not break in. He will use his own key. He will execute the most audacious, technically brilliant, and chillingly precise heist in modern German history. He will walk out of this bank with over 30 million Deutsche Marks in untraceable bearer bonds, cash, and raw diamonds. But here's what makes this story truly, profoundly chilling. Klaus will not drill the vault. He will not use explosives. He will not even touch the 2-meter-thick circular door. He will go to a forgotten utility corridor behind the vault. And using a machine he designed and built in his own basement, he will dissolve a perfect circle through 2 feet of reinforced steel and concrete. He will cut through the vault's wall with a tool that makes no more sound than the building's own ventilation system. A tool that cuts solid steel with nothing but a controlled, silent electric spark, and when he is gone, he will leave behind a perfectly crafted trail of evidence. A trail of forged documents, faked security logs, and meticulously planted clues. This trail will lead the police, the bank's insurers, and the bank's ruthless, shadowy clients, powerful, post-Cold War figures who do not use the legal system, to 4 other men. The bank will never know they were robbed by their maintenance man. The police will arrest the wrong people. The media will report the wrong story. And the scapegoats, chosen by Klaus with the same precision he used to build a clock, one of them completely innocent, will be fed to the wolves. Their lives systematically dismantled and, ultimately, extinguished. This is the true story of the perfect crime. It is a story of patience, of genius, and of an unimaginable, cold, burning rage. How far would you go to correct a lifetime of being invisible? And what happens when the price of perfection is paid not by you, but by everyone else? Let me take you back to where it all began. 10 years before that foggy night, Klaus Richter was nobody, and he was acutely, painfully, and constantly aware of it. At 48 years old, he was a ghost who wore a name tag. For a decade, he had been the chief maintenance engineer for the Hamburg Stadtbank. He was the man you called when a light flickered, when a radiator hissed, when a heavy oak door developed a squeak, or when a banker spilled a cup of coffee on a 200-year-old Persian rug. To the men in their sharp, expensive suits, the Vogels, the Schneiders, the Müllers, he was furniture. He was a function, a pair of hands, a pair of gray overalls. They would hold high-level meetings about multi-million mark transactions, and Klaus would be on a small 6-foot ladder in the corner, changing a ballast in a fluorescent light, and they would not lower their voices. They would not acknowledge his presence. They did not see him. He was literally part of the building's infrastructure. He was the man who cleaned up a banker's vomit from the executive bathroom after the Christmas party and received neither a thank you nor eye contact. He was the man who was told, not asked, to come in at 3 a.m. on a Sunday because Herr Vogel, the bank president, had jammed his personal office shredder with a cigar box. This invisibility, this daily grinding humiliation of being overlooked, was a slow-acting poison, but it also became his armor. And eventually, it would become his weapon, because furniture has eyes. And furniture has ears. Klaus was not a simple janitor. He was a man of intense, coiled-up pride. He had the mind of a brilliant electrical engineer and the hands of a master watchmaker. His small, neat apartment on the outskirts of the city, in a gray working-class building, was filled with intricate clock mechanisms he built by hand. Tiny, beautiful machines of breathtaking complexity, their gears meshing with a precision the bankers' lives utterly lacked. He read physics textbooks for fun. He understood mechanics, solid-state electronics, and inorganic chemistry in a way the university-educated men who ordered him around never could. He had once been on track for a professorship. His thesis on high-voltage plasma dynamics was legendary in his university. But a family disgrace, a scandal involving his father's failed business and a subsequent quiet suicide, had shattered his academic career and left his family in ruins. The good name of Richter was tainted. He had taken the only high-paying technical job he could find that didn't require a background check into his family's good name, maintaining a bank. He was, in effect, a genius trapped in a janitor's body. And for 10 years he listened, he observed. He learned the building, not as a place of work, but as a machine. While replacing a section of carpet in the executive wing, he heard the bank president, Herr Vogel, laughing on a private call about a friendly regulator in Bonn who made embarrassing problems disappear for a small fee delivered in a briefcase, while fixing the ventilation system in the sub-basement. He heard the head of security, Jürgen, bragging to one of the younger guards about how he could loop the camera feed for the loading bay for 30 minutes for the right price. Klaus knew with certainty that Jürgen was selling blind time to smugglers moving questionable goods through the port, and while sorting a rat's nest of wiring in the central server room, a room only he and 2 IT technicians had access to, he learned the bank's real business. The Hamburg Stadtbank wasn't just old, aristocratic money. Since the Berlin Wall had fallen in 1989, it had become the primary clearinghouse for a new, dangerous, and incredibly wealthy kind of client. Russian oligarchs emerging from the Soviet collapse, black market arms dealers from the former Yugoslavia, and corrupt East German officials, all desperate to move their illicit fortunes to the West. These men didn't use normal, traceable accounts. They used the bank's legendary vault. It was called the Kraus Defiance. Built in the 1950s by a paranoid genius vault maker, it was a masterpiece of post-war security. A round 2-meter-thick door of polished steel. No one person knew the combination. It had seismic sensors in the floor, calibrated to detect a footstep. It had thermal sensors on the walls, set to trigger at a 2-degree change. And it had acoustic sensors that could supposedly hear a man whispering. It was, the bank claimed, the most secure room in Europe. But Klaus knew something the builders never intended. He was the maintenance man. He had the original blueprints. He had a copy of the building's plans, locked in his small, windowless office in the sub-basement. He had the schematics for the alarm system, a system he himself was in charge of testing and maintaining. He knew its flaws. He knew its blind spots. He knew that the thermal sensors were useless if the heat was applied slowly and siphoned off at the source. He knew the seismic sensors were designed to detect impact, not the subtle vibration of a high-frequency current. And most importantly, he knew the acoustic sensors were calibrated to detect the high-frequency scream of a drill or the low-frequency boom of an explosion. But they had a dead zone, a narrow band of frequency right in the mid-range. The exact frequency of, say, the building's own massive humming electrical transformers. For years, this knowledge was just a private, intellectual curiosity. A complex puzzle he solved in his head on lonely nights. How would one break the unbreakable? He dreamed of it, not for the money, but for the challenge. To prove to the world, or perhaps just to himself, that the man they ignored, the man in the gray overalls, was smarter than all of them. Combined. He was a man with a brilliant, dangerous, and deeply bored mind, just waiting for a reason to use it. And in October of 1992, on a cold, rainy Tuesday, the bank finally gave him one. The incident that sealed the fate of 4 men happened on a Tuesday afternoon. It was small. It was petty. It was unnecessary. And it was cruel. His name was Dieter, a young teller, barely 21 years old. He was fresh from the countryside, polite to a fault, and visibly terrified of making a mistake. Klaus liked him. In a building full of arrogant, dismissive men, Dieter always smiled and said, "Good morning, Herr Richter," not "Hey you," or more often nothing at all. He even held the door for Klaus once, a gesture so foreign in that building, it had stopped Klaus in his tracks. That afternoon, Klaus was in the main hall on his hands and knees, replacing a cracked marble tile near the teller stations. He was invisible, as always. A tool for the floor. He heard the raised voice first. It was Herr Vogel, the bank president. A tall, immaculate man with a cold, patrician face and hair like polished silver. He was standing at Dieter's window. "Are you an idiot, or are you just a thief?" Vogel's voice was not loud. It was worse. It was a low, cutting hiss that carried across the marble floor. Dieter was pale, a shade of white that Klaus had never seen before. I don't understand, sir. "The drawer balanced this morning. I counted it twice. It's 500 marks short," Vogel said. 500. "Do you know how long it takes a real man to earn that? And you just lose it? Or perhaps you put it in your pocket?" "No, sir. I would never. I don't know how. I recounted. The boy was shaking, on the verge of tears, his voice cracking. "Security!" Vogel barked. Jürgen, the portly security chief, waddled over, a small, cruel smile on his face. He was enjoying the show. "Empty your pockets, boy," Jürgen said, his voice booming, playing to the small crowd that had gathered. In front of the entire bank, a dozen clients in line, all the other tellers, all the staff, they made Dieter empty his pockets. A few coins, a lighter, though he didn't smoke, a folded picture of his girlfriend, a train ticket, no 500 marks. "It must be a mistake, a computer error, I swear, Herr Vogel," Dieter pleaded, his voice now a whisper. Vogel sneered, a small, disgusted curl of his upper lip. "My bank does not make mistakes. You are the mistake. You are fired. Clean out your station," he turned to Jürgen. "Escort him from the building, and I'll be filing a police report for the theft. This thing will not work in another bank in this city, or any city. I'll see to it." Klaus watched, frozen from the floor. He saw the look on Dieter's face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was the hollow, shattering, silent look of a life breaking. The boy was ruined, blacklisted, destroyed, over 500 marks, which, Klaus knew from listening to Vogel's phone calls, was less than the bank president spent on a single lunch. Later that night, Klaus was called to Vogel's opulent wood-paneled office to fix a buzzing fluorescent light. Vogel was at his desk, sipping a whiskey, on the phone with one of the other board members. He was laughing. "Yes, I made an example of him," Vogel said, chuckling. "It's good for the others to see it. Instills discipline, keeps the lower orders on their toes." Klaus finished his work. He replaced the ballast. The buzzing stopped. He was quiet. He was invisible, but inside something cold, hard, and perfectly machined had finally snapped into place. It wasn't just about the puzzle anymore. It wasn't about the challenge. It was about contempt. These men, Vogel, Jürgen, the arrogant bankers who walked past him every day, they weren't just careless. They were cruel. They were a rot. They were a disease in the heart of the building he so meticulously cared for. They were the real thieves, stealing fortunes with phone calls and destroying a young man's life over a rounding error. That night, Klaus went home to his small, neat apartment. He did not work on his clocks. He pulled out a new, clean, leather-bound notebook. He opened his copy of the bank's blueprints and spread them across his kitchen table. He poured himself a small, neat glass of schnapps and drank it in one sharp gulp. The bank, he decided, was a lie. The vault was a lie, and he was going to be the one to expose it. But he wouldn't just rob them. That was too simple. It would leave the structure intact. No, he would do to them what they did to Dieter, but on a magnificent operatic scale. He would find someone to blame. He would make the bank and its corrupt owners eat itself alive. He opened his notebook. On the first pristine unlined page, he wrote 2 words: scapegoat, redirection, The heist had begun. If you could have seen Klaus's apartment in the weeks that followed, you would not have seen a workshop. You would have seen the mind of a predator. The walls of his study, usually covered in intricate clock diagrams, were now covered in personnel files. He had keys to everything. He had quietly borrowed the complete files from human resources, taken them home, photographed every single page with a 35mm camera, and returned them before the office opened. He studied them. He cross-referenced. He wasn't looking for criminals. He was looking for stories. He was looking for flaws, for weaknesses, for cracks in their public-facing lives that he could fill with suspicion. He was looking for men who were already, in their own small ways, guilty. He didn't need a team. He needed a cast of characters. He was a director, and he was casting a tragedy. He settled on 4, scapegoat, 1, Herr Robert Vogel, the president. This was the primary target, the man who had passed the sentence on Dieter. He was the head of the snake, vulnerability, arrogance, and a secret life. How Klaus found it. Klaus's job gave him total access. 2 days after the Dieter incident, Klaus was called to Vogel's office to fix a faulty phone line, a fault Klaus himself had created by loosening a connection. While he had the president's private desk phone open, he did something he had been thinking about for years. He installed a tiny, broadcast-capable microphone, no bigger than a rice grain, inside the handset. It was powered by the phone line itself. For 2 weeks, Klaus sat in his van during his lunch breaks, parked a block away, a small radio receiver on his lap, and he listened. He learned that Vogel was in serious financial trouble. He had massive gambling debts at a private high-stakes club in the St. Pauli district. He was skimming, not from clients, but from dormant, decades-old accounts. He was moving the money in complex, small transfers to an account in Liechtenstein. He was already a thief. He just didn't know he was about to be promoted. Klaus's action. Klaus needed to be able to imitate Vogel. He went to his file of old, signed maintenance work orders. He had dozens of Vogel's signatures, all from the last 10 years. He sat at his kitchen table for hours, night after night, with a single lamp on. Loop the V, sharpen the L, the pressure on the G. He practiced until his hand cramped. By the end of the week, his forgery was not just good. It was perfect, indistinguishable. He also needed a way to link Vogel to the crime. He would use his IT-level access, the same access Luis Alvarez had, which he'd gained by being the only one willing to go into the dusty server rooms. He would create a forged digital transfer request, a massive one from Vogel's own terminal, timed for the night of the heist. Scapegoat 2, Jürgen, the head of security. This was the Mario Guerrero of the group, the man whose greed and laziness made him an easy target. Vulnerability, greed and terminal laziness. How Klaus found it. Klaus didn't need a bug for Jürgen. He just had to stand near him. He had already overheard Jürgen bragging about selling blind time on the security cameras. But he needed a technical link. He needed to tie Jürgen specifically to the vault's security system, Klaus's action. As the maintenance engineer, Klaus was in charge of the alarm hardware. Jürgen was in charge of the software and monitoring. They were 2 halves of a whole, which made the frame perfect. Klaus started performing a series of late-night repairs in the security office. "Just running a diagnostic on the main alarm panel, Jürgen," he'd say. Jürgen, busy with a racing form and a currywurst, would just grunt. "Fine, don't break anything, Richter. I'm busy." While running diagnostics, Klaus was doing something else entirely. He was documenting. He photographed the logbooks. He saw, as he had long suspected, that Jürgen hadn't actually run a full system test in over a year. He just copied and pasted the previous month's all-clear report and sent it to the federal regulators. He was falsifying federal banking records on a monthly basis, Klaus smiled. This was better than he'd hoped. He didn't even need to plant evidence. He just needed to make sure someone looked at the evidence that was already there. But he added one small technical touch. He knew Jürgen's password. It was HSV 1987, the year his favorite Hamburg football team won the championship. It was pathetic. Klaus logged into the system as Jürgen. He went to the vault's sensor logs, and he inserted a single backdated entry. It read, acoustic sensor 3B, false positive. Recalibrating sensitivity. lowering threshold by 15%. JB, it was a digital breadcrumb. A time bomb. He was creating a paper trail that made it look like Jürgen had been intentionally lowering the vault's defenses for weeks. He also borrowed Jürgen's heavy metal coffee thermos for a day, scraping a fine powder of metal from its base. This he would use later. Scapegoat 3, Matthias, the ambitious teller. This was the Fernando Silva, the man whose own actions made him suspicious. Vulnerability, ambition, and an affair. How Klaus found it. Klaus knew because he was the one who had to fix the broken lock on the third-floor supply closet. He'd found a woman's earring, a small pearl stud on the floor. The closet, which was only supposed to hold paper and toner, smelled of cheap, strong perfume. He had noted it, cleaned the earring, and said nothing. The next day he saw that same earring on one of the new, young secretaries, and he saw Matthias, a slick, handsome teller who was always flattering Vogel, give her a quiet, knowing look as they passed in the hall. Klaus's action. He needed to link Matthias to Vogel. He couldn't bug Matthias's phone. But he could create one. He went to a pawn shop in the St. Pauli district and bought 2 D-Net's handy burner phones. This was new technology, expensive and almost impossible to trace. He started sending messages between the 2 phones, creating a fictional damning conversation. One phone was Vogel, the other was Matthias. Vogel phone. Is the internal count ready for the weekend? Matthias phone. Yes, he'll be moved out by Friday. No one suspects. Vogel phone. Good. Your share is waiting. Do not fail. It was simple. It was crude. But in the white-hot panic of a post-heist investigation, it would be explosive. He would plant this phone in Matthias's locker, right before the police were called. Scapegoat 4. Thomas, the perfect teller. This was the masterstroke. The Ricardo Morales, the truly innocent man. Vogel and Jürgen were obvious, high-level suspects. Matthias was the connector. But to make the conspiracy feel real, he needed one more man. A man who didn't fit. A man whose very innocence would make him look guilty. Vulnerability. He was too perfect. How Klaus found him. Thomas was the opposite of Matthias. He was quiet, meticulous, religious. He never joked, never drank, never made a mistake. He was like Klaus, invisible in his own way. And like Ricardo Morales in the example, he was resented by the other tellers for his perfection. He made them look bad. Klaus's action. Thomas didn't have a vulnerability Klaus could exploit. So Klaus had to create one. Thomas was a man of routine. He kept his locker spotless. In it, he had a small, expensive set of precision tools for his eyeglass repair hobby. One night, Klaus used his master key to open Thomas's locker. He stole one item, a single monogrammed screwdriver with the letter T engraved on the handle. This screwdriver would be the clue that broke the case. He would drop it near the alarm panel. A man like Thomas would never be so careless, which is exactly what would make the police believe he must have been in a panic. Now he had his crew. The corrupt boss, the compromised security chief, the ambitious inside man, and the perfect accomplice who was anything but. A perfect quadrangle of guilt. All he had to do was steal 30 million marks and point the police in their direction. Before he built his key, Klaus had to build his escape. The heist was only half the equation. The other half was the disappearance. He knew he could never spend the money in Germany. He couldn't be Klaus Richter anymore. Klaus Richter, the helpful maintenance man, had to vanish, just as his scapegoats would. In the months leading up to the heist, he began to build his new life. He was a planner. He left nothing to chance. He took his life savings, modest, but carefully, meticulously kept. 80,000 Deutsche Marks. He began making small trips. A weekend in Denmark, a holiday in Belgium. He wasn't sightseeing. He was looking for his own El Artista. He heard about a man in Antwerp, through hushed whispers in the Port District. A man who worked in the back of a diamond polishing shop. A man who, for a very high price, could create documents. Not forgeries, originals. He had connections deep inside the Belgian bureaucracy. Men left over from the war who knew how to make paper trails appear and disappear. Klaus took a vacation. He went to Antwerp. He found the shop. He met the man. No names were exchanged. Klaus explained what he needed. He didn't ask for a new identity. That was for amateurs. A new identity is a blank page, and blank pages are suspicious. He asked for an old one. He wanted the identity of a man who had died as a child, whose records were dusty and forgotten. A week later, and for 50,000 marks, he had it. His new name was Lars Janssen. He had a Belgian birth certificate from 1950. The real Lars Janssen had died of polio in 1953. His death was never properly filed. He had school records, a passport issued in 1985 perfectly aged. Lars Janssen was a real person. He had just been dormant for 40 years. Next, the money. How do you move 30 million marks? You don't, not in cash. He had listened in Vogel's office. He knew the bank's new corrupt clients didn't store cash. They stored bearer bonds. Bearer bonds are like cash, but they're just paper, anonymous. Whoever holds the bond owns the bond. No name, no trace. He would be stealing paper. Lightweight, easy to conceal. He would also take the diamonds he'd heard another client kept. He opened 3 bank accounts. One in Luxembourg as Lars Janssen, one in Zurich, Switzerland as Lars Janssen, one in Austria as Lars Janssen. He deposited a small amount of his own savings in each, just to make them real and aged. They were ready. They were waiting to be fed. His escape plan was simple. After the heist, he would not run. He would go back to his apartment. He would be Klaus Richter for 1 more week. He would go to work on Tuesday, after the holiday. He would be the one to discover the alarm fault. He would be the one to help the police. I don't understand, Inspector. The system was nominal when I left. He would be the invisible, helpful maintenance man, right in the center of the storm. Then, when the arrests were made, when the case was closed, when the bank and the police were celebrating, Klaus Richter would take a 2-week vacation to recover from the stress. He would take a train to Copenhagen. He would take a ferry to Belgium. And on that ferry, Klaus Richter would cease to exist. He would walk off the boat as Lars Janssen, and he would never, ever come back. Klaus locked himself in his small, soundproofed basement workshop. The vault was the problem, the Kraus defiance. He unrolled the blueprints under a harsh halogen lamp. The walls were a sandwich, 1 foot of solid steel, 2 feet of reinforced concrete, and another 6-inch steel plate on the inside. The door was impossible. The locks were impossible. The alarms were the real enemy. Seismic, heat, acoustic. He sat on a stool for an entire weekend, just staring at the schematic. How do you defeat heat, sound, and vibration all at once? The answer came to him late one night while listening to the hum of his refrigerator. You don't. You use a method that creates none of them, or at least none of them at a level the alarms are built to detect. You hide your signal in the noise. His mind went back to his clocks, to the tiny, precise movements. You don't use a hammer. You use a file. You don't blast. You dissolve. He began to research. He went to the Hamburg University Library, posing as a mature student writing a paper on industrial fabrication. He read obscure, forgotten papers on metallurgy, on electrolysis, on high-frequency induction. And then he found it. A paper from a 1970s industrial engineering journal, translated from Japanese. Arc-based thermal erosion. The principle was simple. A sustained, high-frequency, low-amperage electrical arc, when applied to metal, doesn't melt it in the conventional sense. It erodes it. It superheats a microscopic point, turning the metal from solid to gas, bypassing the liquid stage. Sublimation. It was a silent, slow, and contained process. It was used for making microscopic, precise holes in engine turbines. Klaus was going to use it to make a hole big enough for a man. He began to build. He called it the Stille Funke, the silent spark. For 6 months, his workshop became a high-voltage laboratory. He bought high-voltage transformers from electronic surplus stores. He bought pure tungsten rods, heavy-gauge copper wiring, and industrial power supplies, all in cash, from different suppliers all over northern Germany. He built a heavy-duty tripod system to hold the cutting head perfectly still. He built a control box, covered in dials and old analog gauges, to minutely adjust the frequency and amperage. He needed to find the exact frequency. He took a sick day. He spent the entire day in the bank's sub-basement with a spectrum analyzer, recording the building's ambient electronic hum. He found it. 60 hertz, with a slight overtone at 120 hertz. That was his target. He went home and calibrated his machine. The sound it made was not a drill's scream. It was a low, steady hum. He used his audio spectrum analyzer. The sound was a perfect 60 Hz hum, the exact frequency as the bank's main electrical transformers. It would be completely invisible to the acoustic sensors. The heat was the next problem. The arc was incredibly hot, but tiny, no bigger than a pinprick. It would heat the steel wall, but slowly. Too slowly for the alarms? He couldn't risk it. Klaus designed a secondary system, a small, closed-loop water cooler. A custom-milled rubber gasket would create a seal against the wall, and a tiny, silent aquarium pump would circulate cool water around the tungsten cutting head, absorbing the waste heat. The water would be pumped to a small radiator and fan, venting the heat as a faint, cool mist. It would keep the wall's temperature just below the trigger point of the thermal alarms. He needed to test it. He couldn't test it on animals. He had to test it on steel. He went to the Werften, the shipyards, and bought scrap steel. Thick, heavy plates, the same kind used on container ships. He said he was a local artist, building a modern sculpture. They sold it to him for almost nothing. He set it up in his basement. Test 1. He wore welding goggles. He turned the key. A tiny, brilliant blue spark, no bigger than an eyelash, touched the steel. There was no noise, no smoke, just the smell of ozone. He began to move the head. After an hour, the heatsink failed. The water pump, too weak, boiled its reserve. The wall plate's temperature spiked. His test sensor, identical to the bank's, screamed. Failure. Test 2, 3 weeks later. He had re-engineered the pump. He had a larger radiator. He turned the key. He cut for 3 hours. The heat was stable, but the frequency of the arc was slightly off. As the transformer heated up, the frequency drifted, creating a high-pitched whine at 1000 Hz. His acoustic test sensor, calibrated to the banks, lit up red. Failure. Test 3, 1 month later. He was frustrated. He felt the cold rage that had driven him from academia. He would not be beaten by a machine. He rebuilt the entire power converter, using a crystal oscillator to lock the frequency. It was a beautiful, elegant solution. He turned the key. The low 60 Hz hum was perfect. It was stable. The water cooler was silent. He cut. He cut for 8 hours straight. His hand was cramped. His eyes burned from staring at the tiny blue light. When he was done, he had cut a line 6 inches long. It was agonizingly, excruciatingly slow, but it was silent. It was cool. It would work. To cut a 2-foot-wide circle through the vault wall, through the outer steel, the concrete, and the inner steel, he calculated, would take 48, maybe 50 hours. 50 hours of continuous, silent, focused cutting. He looked at the calendar.
The Tag der Deutschen Einheit, German Unification Day, was a 4-day weekend.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. The bank would be empty for 96 hours. It was more than enough time. He pinned his final flowchart to the wall. This was the plan. Not a single detail was left to chance. Phase 1, Infiltration, Friday, 18. Stay late. Tell night guard, Hans, that he needs to run a full diagnostic on the sub-basement electrical grid, as per federal regulation. A 72-hour test. 20K and Hans locks the main doors. Klaus is now locked inside the bank. He is in his basement office. Go to the central alarm panel. Use his own master maintenance code to put the entire system into level 4 diagnostic mode. 2001. A message will appear on Hans's screen. System maintenance. Do not interfere. All sensors offline. This is a standard authorized message. Hans will see it, sigh, and go back to his newspaper. 30. Move the Stillerfunke equipment. It is already inside, stored in crates marked spare ventilation parts and new sump pump motor. He will move it to the utility corridor behind the vault. Phase 2. The cut, Saturday, Sunday. Friday. $23. Begin the cut. He will work in 4-hour shifts. 4 hours cutting, 1 hour rest, check systems, drink coffee. Saturday, 23 to 24 hours in. He must be through the outer steel plate. Sunday, Tumbam, 37 hours in. He will switch to the silent, high-pressure water drill, also pre-staged, to cut the concrete and rebar. This will be messy, but quiet. Sunday, 23 Tau, 48 hours in. He will begin the final cut on the inner steel plate. Phase 3. The hall, Monday. 04. Breach the vault, enter. Go only to the 3 target boxes. He knows the numbers from Vogel's calls. Use simple lockpicks on the cheap deposit box locks. Load the bearer bonds, diamonds, and cash into a simple duffel bag. Time in vault, 15 minutes. Maximum, phase 4, the cover-up, Monday. 4:15. Begin sealing the hole. He will slot the steel and concrete circles back into place. He will use a special, quick-setting thermal epoxy to seal the seams from the back. He will use a grinder to smooth the seam. He will repaint the wall with the same exact match gray lead-based paint. The wall will be solid again. It will be invisible. Monday, 07 Bowers. Clean. Every drop of water, every metal filing, every footprint. Phase 5. The frame. Monday, 09 Dower. Go to Matthias's locker. Plant the burner phone. 9:15. Go to the server room. Log in. Initiate the faked 10 million mark transfer request from Vogel's account, using a forged digital signature he created. 9:30. Go to the main vault door. Jam the broken drill bit, coated in metal from Jürgen's thermos, into the hinge mechanism. This is the redirection. The police will find this, and it will point them to the front of the vault. Not the back 9 to 45. Drop the monogrammed screwdriver, stolen from Thomas, the perfect teller, near the alarm panel. Go back to his office. Hit 30. Take the alarm system out of diagnostic mode. 31. Call the security desk. Hans, this is Richter. We have a problem. The vault's acoustic sensor is flagging an error. I think someone's tampered with the hinge. He will be the one to discover the crime. Phase 6. The escape. Tuesday and beyond. Tuesday. The bank is in chaos. He will be helpful to the police. 1 week later, the arrests will be made. 2 weeks later, Klaus Richter takes his vacation. He becomes Lars Janssen. The plan was perfect. Friday. It's down 9 p.m. The bank was empty. The last employee had left. Klaus, in his grey overalls, did his final patrol. Good holiday to you, Herr Richter, Hans, the night guard, said, locking the main door. Don't work too hard on that diagnostic. Just following the regulations, Hans, Klaus replied, his voice flat. And to you. The heavy glass and steel door closed with a pneumatic hiss. The bolt thudded into place. Klaus was locked inside. Exactly as planned, he waited 2 hours. He sat in his office drinking black coffee. He was not nervous. He was calm. He was a surgeon about to begin. At 10:00 p.m., he went to the central alarm panel. This was his domain. He typed in his 14-digit master maintenance code. He put the entire system into level 4 diagnostic mode. A message appeared on Hans's screen. 3 floors up, system maintenance. Do not interfere. All sensors offline. Hans saw it, sighed, and went back to his newspaper. The bank was now deaf and blind. Friday, 10:30 p.m. Klaus moved his equipment. It was heavy, over 400 pounds. He had brought it in piece by piece over 3 months, labeled as spare ventilation parts and new sump pump motor. He wheeled it all on a heavy-duty cart to the sub-basement, to the cold concrete utility corridor that ran behind the Kraus Defiance Vault. No one ever came here. It was a dead end filled with old pipes. He unrolled his blueprints. He measured. He found the exact spot. The wall was thickest here, but it was also the furthest from the seismic sensors. He set up the Stiller Funker. He bolted the tripod to the floor. He attached the cutting head. He sealed the water-cooling gasket to the steel. He took a deep, steadying breath. He turned the key. The low, soft sound was instantly lost in the background hum of the building's main power. He put on his goggles. The tiny blue-white spark, no bigger than an eyelash, touched the wall. The faint smell of ozone. He checked his watch. 10:47 p.m. He began the cut. A perfect 2-foot circle. He moved the cutting head a millimeter. Waited. Another millimeter. This was a job of pure patience. This was watchmaking. Saturday, 6 a.m. He had been cutting for over 7 hours. He was exhausted. His hand was cramped from the fine motor control. He had completed maybe 1/8 of the circle. He stopped. He drank more black coffee from a thermos. He checked the cooling system. It was working perfectly. A faint cool mist was the only byproduct. He checked the wall temperature with his digital thermometer. 20 degrees Celsius. The ambient air was 19. Perfect. He ate a piece of dry bread. He went back to work. Millimeter by millimeter. Saturday, $10 p.m. He was 24 hours in. He was leaning against the wall, his whole body aching. The outer steel plate, 1 foot thick, was cut. He used a heavy-duty suction cup and a small manual winch. He pulled. The 200-pound steel circle came loose with a soft shunk. He gently laid it on a rubber mat he'd prepared. Behind it, 2 feet of dark, solid concrete, crisscrossed with steel rebar. This was the next phase. He put the funk away. He took out his next tool. It was not a jackhammer. It was a high-pressure water drill. He had modified it to be almost silent. It used a pinpoint jet of water and abrasive sand to cut. Shh, it was slow. It was wet, but it was quiet. He worked all night, cutting the concrete, carefully cutting the rebar inside. The floor was a slurry of gray mud. Sunday, 4 p.m. He was through the concrete. His overalls were soaked. His arms felt like lead. He had not slept in 40 hours. He was looking at the final layer, the 6-inch inner steel plate. He was shaking from exhaustion, but his mind was crystal clear. He dried the wall. He set up the stiller funky again. He turned the key. The blue spark began its work on the final layer. Sunday, 11:30 p.m. He was done. The final cut was complete. He turned off the machine. The silence was absolute. It was deafening. He pushed gently on the inner steel circle. It fell with a muffled thud onto the carpeted floor inside the vault. He had done it. A perfect clean hole. A rush of cool, dry, still air hit his face. It smelled of old paper, dust, and wealth. He shined a flashlight inside. Metal shelves. Hundreds and hundreds of safety deposit boxes. He crawled through. He was inside the Kraus Defiance. He did not rush. He did not ransack. He had his list. Box 112, Box 451, Box 808. He used a small, simple set of lockpicks. The deposit boxes were cheap, simple locks, not meant to stop a thief who was already inside the vault. Click. Box 112, full of bearer bonds. He stuffed them into his duffel bag. Click. Box 451, diamonds. Dozens of small sealed velvet bags of high-grade uncut diamonds. He took them all. Click. Box 808, cash. Bundles of US dollars and Deutsche Marks. Almost 5 million. He loaded his bags. 30 million. Maybe more. He was done. Monday, 1 a.m. Now the real work. The cover-up. He crawled out of the vault. He took the inner steel circle. He slotted it back into place. He used a special quick-setting thermal epoxy to seal it from the back. He did the same with the concrete, pouring in a fast, dry slurry. Finally, he replaced the massive outer steel disc. He sealed it with the same epoxy. When he was done, he used a small, battery-powered grinder to smooth the seam. He painted it with the same gray, lead-based paint. In the dim light of the utility corridor, it was invisible. The wall was solid again. Monday, 4 a.m., he cleaned. He didn't just sweep. He vacuumed. He used a wet vac to pull up all the concrete slurry. He wiped every surface. He packed all his tools, every wire, every cloth. He packed the empty coffee thermos. He left nothing. Monday, 9 a.m. The bank would open for business tomorrow. The day shift guard was now at the front desk. Klaus, in a fresh pair of overalls, began Phase 5. He went to the locker room. Planted the phone. He went to the server room. Initiated the transfer. He went to the main vault door. Jammed the drill bit in the hinge. He dropped the screwdriver. He went back to his office. Monday, 10:30 a.m. He took the alarm system out of diagnostic mode. He waited 1 minute. He picked up his office phone and dialed the security desk. Hans, this is Richter. We have a problem. A serious one. The vault's acoustic sensor is flagging a critical error. I think someone's tried to tamper with the main door hinge. The perfect crime was complete. By Tuesday morning, the bank was in chaos. A client had come to access Box 451. The managers went through the ritual. The keys, the combinations. The massive Kraus Defiance door hissed open. The client went in. He came out, his face white. It's empty. The bank went into lockdown. The police were called. Inspector Schmidt arrived. He was a smart, methodical man from the old school. He was baffled. "The vault was sealed," the bank president Vogel insisted, his face pale. The alarms never rang. "It's impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Schmidt said. He checked the vault. The door was fine, but his team, dusting for prints, found the broken drill bit in the hinge. "Aha," Schmidt said. "Our entry point." They tried to drill the hinge. Klaus, standing by, just nodded. "A good attempt, Inspector." "But the alarms would have—" "Unless," Schmidt interrupted, "someone inside turned them off." The investigation began. It was a dead end. No entry, no alarms. It had to be an inside job. Who had access? The managers, the security chief. The police were stuck. And then, the metal analysis came back from the drill bit. "It's coated in a unique metal alloy," the lab tech told Schmidt. "We found a match. From a thermos on the security chief's desk. Jürgen. Jürgen was brought in for questioning. He panicked. He yelled. He threatened. He looked in every way guilty. Schmidt demanded the security logs. He saw Jürgen's faked all-clear reports. He saw the backdated entry planted by Klaus. Acoustic sensor 3B, false positive. "Recalibrating sensitivity. You were lowering the defenses," Schmidt yelled. Jürgen was arrested. The next day, an anonymous tip, a payphone call made by Klaus on his lunch break, pointed to the teller. "You're looking in the wrong place," his disguised voice said. "Check the slick one. Matthias. He's Vogel's boy." The police, desperate, looked into Matthias. They searched his locker. They found the D-Net's burner phone. They read the messages. "Is the internal count ready for the weekend?" "Your share is waiting." The case cracked wide open. Suddenly, Matthias was the inside man, and Herr Vogel was the mastermind. They tore Vogel's life apart. They found the gambling debts. They found the real small-time skimming. And then they found the big one, the forged 10 million mark transfer request, initiated by Klaus from Vogel's own terminal. Vogel was arrested at his desk. Finally, they found the last piece of evidence, the monogrammed T screwdriver lying near the alarm panel. "Thomas," Schmidt said, looking at the quiet, perfect teller. Thomas was baffled. That's mine. How did it get there?" "That's what we'd like to know," Schmidt said. Thomas had no alibi. He was home alone reading. He was the fourth accomplice. The lookout, it was perfect. The media called it the banker's conspiracy. A conspiracy between the president, the head of security, and two trusted tellers. They were geniuses, the papers said. They were tried. With the forged evidence, the real, faked logs, the planted phone, and the faked transfer, they were all convicted. Vogel got 12 years. Jürgen got 8. Matthias, 10. Thomas, 7. The case was closed. Klaus Richter, the humble maintenance man, was given a 5,000 mark bonus by the bank's board for his honesty and help during the investigation. What happened next was exactly what Klaus had planned for. And it was worse than he could have ever imagined. The real owners of the boxes, the Russian arms dealer, the corrupt politician, the oligarch, they didn't believe the police. They had lost 30 million marks. They knew the bankers weren't smart enough to pull this off. But Vogel, Jürgen, Matthias, and Thomas were the only leads they had. And these men do not use the court system. They do not appeal. They send cleaners. Herr Vogel, the bank president, did not last 6 months in prison. He was found in the showers. The official report said he slipped and fell. His neck was broken in 3 places. Jürgen, the security chief, was released on appeal after 2 years. He had a good lawyer. He was killed in a hit-and-run accident 2 weeks later while walking his dog. The car was a black Mercedes. It was never found. Thomas, the perfect teller, the man whose only crime was being meticulous, could not handle the pressure. He hanged himself in his cell 1 year into his sentence. He left a note that said, "I don't know why this happened." And Matthias, the young, slick teller. He knew too much, or so the Russians thought. He was attacked in the prison yard by 2 other inmates. He survived, but he was transferred to a lower security hospital wing to recover. 2 men, dressed as hospital orderlies, signed him out for an X-ray. He was never seen again. His family never found a body. He just vanished. 4 men. Their lives extinguished. Dieter, the young teller who was the catalyst, never recovered from being blacklisted. He fell into drugs. He died of an overdose in a train station bathroom in 1995. 5 lives. All ruined, all dead. All for a crime they never committed. All to pay the price for one man's perfect plan. 2 weeks after the trial, Klaus Richter took his vacation. He packed a single small bag. He took the train to Copenhagen. He took the ferry to Antwerp. He walked onto the boat as Klaus Richter, the invisible maintenance man. He walked off as Lars Jansen, a Belgian citizen. He destroyed his German passport, dropping the pieces into the cold North Sea. Klaus Richter was gone. He traveled to Luxembourg. He deposited the first set of bearer bonds. He traveled to Zurich. He deposited the diamonds. The money was clean. It was safe. He was, by any measure, one of the wealthiest men in Europe. He settled in a small, quiet town in the Swiss Alps, near Geneva. He bought a small, beautiful shop on a cobblestone street, a shop with a large sun-filled window. He opened a business, L. Jansen, Horlogerie. He was a watchmaker. He lived his dream. He spent his days in quiet, sunlit peace. He worked with tiny, precise tools. He created masterpieces of clockwork. The wealthy patrons of Geneva loved his work. They loved his quiet, meticulous nature. He was a master craftsman. He was respected. He was, for the first time in his life, seen. He got everything he wanted. But invisibility has a price, and so does being seen. At night, he would lock his shop. He would sit in the back, under a single perfect light, working on a complex movement. And in the perfect ticking silence of his new life, he would think. He didn't think about the money. He didn't think about the thrill. He thought about the look on Dieter's face. He thought about the sound Vogel's neck must have made. He thought about Matthias vanishing into the night. He thought about Thomas's note. I don't know why this happened. He hadn't just framed them. He had written them into a death sentence. The bank had killed for pride. The Russians had killed for control. Klaus had killed for... what, for silence? For respect? What haunted him wasn't the blood. It was the simplicity. The plan had worked too well. The only thread left was the money. Or rather, the lack of it. That was the one thing the cartel, the real owners, never recovered. They had suspects. They had corpses. But they never found the 30 million marks. That was the one loose end that never got tied. The one question that still echoed in the dark corners of Eastern Europe. Where is the money? They never knew Klaus Richter existed, and Lars Jansen, the quiet watchmaker, never gave them a reason to look twice. The perfect crime didn't leave witnesses. It left a question, and it left a man who, surrounded by the perfect ticking clocks he had built, could hear only one sound. A sound he could never escape. The low, silent 60 hertz, the sound of the spark.